She knocked for work holding her baby. The cowboy looked once and said, "You're home." Western frontier, Montana Territory, late 19th century, first snowfall of the winter. The wind howled like a wounded animal, dragging curtains of snow across the open prairie. The sun had long dipped beneath the horizon, leaving only a leaden sky and a blanket of white swallowing the land. Out there, where the trail dissolved into wilderness, a lone figure trudged forward, one step, then another, then a stagger. June Holloway clutched her daughter tighter against her chest, her arms numb, her fingers stiff and cracked from the cold. Clara's breath came in small, wheezing puffs, her tiny face tucked into her mother's shoulder. She had stopped crying over an hour ago. That terrified June more than the crying ever did. The hem of her skirt was frozen stiff, her boots soaked through. Snow clung to her lashes, but she did not stop. She could not stop, not now. She crested the rise and saw it, faint but real. A house. A single cabin hunched beneath a swaying pine. A light burned in the window. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin, steady column. "Please," she whispered in her mind, "just this once. Please let it be someone kind." She crossed the last stretch with her last ounce of strength, her boots crunching against the crusted snow, and climbed the creaking porch steps. The door stood before her, thick and unwelcoming, the wood darkened with years and storms. She knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. Silence. She pressed her lips to Clara's forehead. Still warm, but barely. The door opened. A man filled the frame, tall and broad, backlit by firelight. His face was weathered, his beard untrimmed, eyes a muted gray. He wore a coat of old wool and a gun belt slung low on his hip. His hair was too long, his posture wary. He looked at June. He looked at Clara. June's voice cracked out, raw and ragged. "I do not want trouble. I can cook, clean, split kindling if I have to. I just need somewhere warm for her to sleep, just for the night." The man said nothing. Clara stirred in her arms, letting out a weak sound, barely more than a breath. The man's eyes lingered on the child, then shifted back to June. Snow blew in between them. Seconds passed, maybe more. Then, slowly, the man stepped back. "If you need a home," he said, voice low and steady, "then this is a home." June didn't move, not at first. She waited for him to change his mind. For the door to slam, for the usual rejection. It never came. He stepped aside. June entered. Inside, it was warmer than she expected. The scent of smoke and dry cedar filled the air. A kettle hissed over the fire. A simple table stood in the corner with a pair of chairs. No decorations, no photos, just a bed, a stove, and the glow of flame. He shut the door behind her. She turned to face him. "Thank you." He walked past her without a word, knelt by the fire, and added another log. Then he opened a cupboard, pulled out a wool blanket, and handed it to her without meeting her eyes. "Sit by the stove," he said. "She needs to get her warmth back slow." June obeyed, sinking down onto a worn rug, wrapping Clara close to her chest, the blanket tight around them both. The child stirred again, a little less faint this time. "You live alone?" June asked, her voice small. He nodded. "For a long time now." June looked into the fire. She did not speak about Matthew. Not tonight, maybe never. Some stories needed time before they could be told. The man stood in silence, watching the snow outside pile against the glass. "What is your name?" she asked softly. "Thomas Redley." "I'm June." He nodded once. Then he moved to the corner, took off his coat, and sat at the edge of the bed, his back to her. Outside, the wind wailed. Inside, for the first time in weeks, June felt the ache in her chest ease. Not gone, not healed, but quieter. And behind her, Clara slept. The morning came gray and slow. Snow still clung to the windows, and the wind had not softened. June stirred first, easing herself up from the rug by the stove where she had dozed in a half-sleep. Clara pressed close against her. The child's cheeks were no longer pale. A soft pink bloomed beneath her skin like the first blush of spring. June exhaled shakily, brushing a hand over Clara's hair. They were alive. That was something. She rose quietly, moving to the hearth where embers still glowed beneath the iron grate. She fed the fire with care, small twigs first, then larger chunks. Her hands, still sore from cold, fumbled with the iron poker. She was not used to quiet homes, or men who let you stay without questions. Thomas was gone. His coat was missing from the peg, his boots from the door. No note, no sound, just the echo of a man who moved through the world like a shadow. June made a thin soup from oats she found in the pantry, boiling it with a pinch of salt and water. She fed Clara by spoon and tucked her into the corner of the bed, the blanket wrapped tight. Then she cleaned, wiped the table, scrubbed the hearthstone, swept dust from the corners that looked like they had not seen care in years. Later, she opened the door to her room and found something there, laid neatly across the floorboards. A fur pelt. Coarse, thick, the kind hunters wore in deep winter, folded carefully, placed at her threshold like a gift. She stared at it, unsure if she should feel gratitude or alarm. But when her bare feet stepped onto its warmth that night, she did not question further. Thomas returned before dusk, quiet as ever. He did not look at her, only nodded once and stoked the fire. When she set the soup pot out, he took one bowl and ate standing, near the window. "You do not have to feed me," he said. "You let me stay," she replied. "I cook. That seems fair." He did not answer. But the next morning, the water bucket was filled. They lived like that for days. Their lives were parallel lines that never touched. He repaired tools, rode out into the snow to check fences. She tended to Clara, mended torn cloth, kept the fire lit. Words were rare, but the silence between them was not cruel, just unspoken. The house itself was made of old pine and stone, worn down by seasons that had no mercy. The walls creaked in the wind. There were no curtains, no pictures. Just a rifle above the mantel, a saddle in the corner, and a tin box of bullets near the stove. One afternoon, as snow flurries danced outside, June explored the outer shed, looking for kindling. Inside, half buried beneath sacks of forgotten seed and rusted tools, she found a small tin. Dust coated the lid. She pried it open. Inside, seeds, wrapped in muslin, labeled in faded ink, wildflowers, mint, chamomile. She held the tin like it might shatter in her hands. That evening, while Clara napped beside the stove, June took an old tin pail, filled it with the driest soil she could scrape from beneath the eaves, and pressed 3 seeds into it with careful fingers. She set the pail on the windowsill. The glass was cold. Outside, snow piled high. The earth was sleeping. Still, she planted. When Thomas passed the window that night, he paused. "What is that?" he asked. "Nothing that will grow now," she said, "but maybe later." He looked at her just briefly, then said, "That window leaks. The frost'll kill anything in there." "Then it will die trying," she replied, "but I still had to plant it." Thomas said nothing, but the next morning there was a sliver of beeswax sealed around the window's edges. She did not mention it, but she smiled when no one was looking. The wind was restless that night. It howled across the plain like something wounded, wrapping itself around the cabin, slipping through the cracks in the wood, and rattling the windows with its long, cold fingers. June lay awake beneath a quilt patched with more memories than fabric. Clara breathed softly beside her, arms flung wide in sleep, untouched by the storm outside. But June's eyes stayed open. Something in the air felt wrong. Not just the wind, not just the cold, a tension, a heaviness pressing against her chest. It wasn't fear, but it wasn't peace either. Then she heard it, a sudden thump. Then another, muted but sharp. Something striking wood not once, but twice. She held her breath, listening. There it was again. Not the storm, not the animals. Something closer. The barn. She sat up, careful not to wake Clara, and slipped on her coat and boots. The floorboards creaked beneath her, but the rest of the house held still. She grabbed the oil lamp, shielding the flame as she stepped into the cold. Snow had begun to fall again, soft and drifting like ashes from the sky. The barn door was ajar, swaying slightly in the wind. June approached slowly, heart thudding. She pushed the door open and stopped. Thomas was on his knees in the center of the barn. The oil lamp beside him threw long shadows across the floor. He did not look up. His hands gripped something tightly, what looked like a piece of cloth, blackened at the edges, half burnt, but preserved. His shoulders were hunched, muscles taut. His head was bowed, and from his lips came a sound she had never imagined hearing from him. He was crying. Not loud, not heaving sobs, but broken sounds, raw and jagged, rising from somewhere so deep it barely had a name. The man who had barely spoken in full sentences now whispered one word over and over again. "Jonah." His hands clutched the scorched cloth to his chest. "I told you not to go back," he said, voice thick. "I told you to wait for me. I should have." His voice cracked. He pressed his forehead to the floorboards. "I should have taken your place." June froze, hands still on the barn door. She didn't mean to watch. She knew this was not a moment meant to be witnessed, but something in her refused to turn away, not from the grief, not from the truth it revealed. Later, much later, Thomas would tell her the rest. How Jonah had been his younger brother, just 17 when the trouble started. How the rustlers had come through, demanding cattle, threatening blood. How Jonah had tried to protect what their father built. How Thomas had been away that night, scouting the fence line. How the flames had been seen too late. The barn, the livestock, Jonah. All gone in minutes. Only one body had been recovered. And ever since, Thomas had carried the burned cloth, his brother's scarf, wrapped in silence and guilt. That night, June did not call out to him. She closed the barn door gently and walked back through the snow, the sound of his pain still echoing in her ears. The next morning she rose early and baked a small loaf of bread. It was nothing fancy, just flour, water, a touch of lard, but it was warm and whole. She wrapped it in a linen cloth and placed it beside the barn door. Next to it, she set a folded piece of paper, torn from the back of her journal. She wrote only one sentence. "No one is ever truly gone if someone still remembers their name." She signed it with nothing, just left it there. Later that day, Thomas came in from the fields. He did not speak, but something in his expression had shifted. He looked tired, but less guarded, less alone. That evening, June noticed something else. The barn door, usually bolted shut by sundown, was left open just a crack, enough to let in the wind, enough to let something else out. The days grew longer, though the snow still fell. Each morning, June would sweep the floor, tend the fire, and stir something warm in the pot. Clara had learned to waddle on her own, her small boots scuffing the wooden floor as she trailed June from room to room. Her presence brought something soft to the silence, a brightness that neither Thomas nor the house had known in a long time. Thomas remained quiet, but his silences had shifted. They were no longer walls, more like windows, fogged, but letting in some measure of light. Then one afternoon, after chores were done and Clara had fallen asleep in a sunlit patch near the hearth, Thomas appeared at the doorway with something clutched in his hand. It was a small book, blackened along the edges, the cover curled as if it had been pulled from a fire. A leather strap kept it shut. He walked over to June, set it gently on the table between them, and stood back. "I want to read it," he said, voice low, "but I cannot." She looked up at him. "Is it yours?" He shook his head. "Jonah's." She opened it slowly. The pages inside were scorched in places, ink smudged, but some remained legible, sketches, notes, and pieces of what seemed to be songs, or prayers. "Will you teach me?" he asked, not looking her in the eye. June's heart ached. She nodded once. "Yes, I will." That evening, she found a piece of flat board in the barn, cleaned it off, and leaned it against the porch rail. With a stub of chalk, she wrote the alphabet in large letters. Thomas sat on the top step, his hands resting on his knees, watching as she shaped each curve. Clara toddled around their feet, humming to herself, picking up little pebbles and pretending to write in the dirt. "Say A," June said. Thomas tried. It came out rough. "Eh?" She smiled. "Close enough." They practiced every evening after chores. June would write, Thomas would sound them out, stumbling but never quitting. Clara sometimes echoed them, shrill and proud. When Thomas got a letter right, she clapped like it was magic. One afternoon, Thomas brought out the book again. "This part here," he said, pointing to a line. "What does it say?" June traced the words with her finger. "It says, 'Home is not a place. It is a name, whispered in the dark, and someone answering back.'" Thomas stared at the page for a long time, then nodded once. The next morning, while cleaning near the front window, June noticed something. Just above the frame, etched clumsily into the soft pine, were 4 letters, uneven, crude, but unmistakable. "Home." She ran her fingers over the carving, breath catching in her chest. She said nothing. That night, they ate in near silence, the fire popping between them. Clara dozed on June's lap, cheeks rosy from warmth. When Thomas rose to clear the bowls, June looked at him across the dim room. "You did not ask for much when I came here," she said softly. "I do not need much," he replied. "But you needed something." He paused, then nodded once, not meeting her eyes. Outside, the wind had died. Only snow remained, falling soft against the glass. And above the window, where no one else could see, the word waited, scratched into the wood by a man who had never said what he longed for. But June saw it, and she understood. The snow had begun to melt along the southern slope of the hill. Water trickled beneath the crust, darkening the soil and giving the wind a new scent, earth, cold and waking. Inside the cabin, Clara had learned to say "Mama" and "more," and was halfway to Thomas, though it still came out as Tom-Tom. She toddled after the man now, wooden spoon in hand, copying his stride, his quiet. June watched them from the porch, hands wrapped around a chipped mug. Her heart ached with something she dared not name. That afternoon, while sorting old linens near the hearth, June found an envelope tucked between pages of an old hymnal, addressed to her, from Missouri. Her fingers trembled. She opened it slowly, carefully. It was from Sister Lorna at the mission school. They had heard of Matthew's absence. There was concern, sympathy. And then the offer. A teaching position had opened in the town schoolhouse, warm room and board, modest pay, steady life. They would welcome her back. The paper crinkled in her grip. That night, after Clara was asleep and the house sat still in firelight, June sat at the table and read the letter again, and again. Her mind swirled. She could have a roof that was not borrowed. She could raise Clara around other children. She could teach, contribute, be part of a town where her name was not a whispered question. She would not need to lean on Thomas's silence or goodwill. And yet, she looked toward the front window, where the word "home" still rested, etched in the wood. The wind picked up, brushing snow off the sill. June closed her eyes. The next morning, Clara followed Thomas to the barn. He gave her a wooden brush and let her stroke the side of the old mare, laughing when she said, "Good girl, horsey," in a sing-song lilt. June watched them from the doorway. When Clara came running back, cheeks pink and hair wind-swept, she climbed into June's arms and whispered, "If we go, who will teach Tom-Tom to read?" The words settled deep, simple, honest. June said nothing. She just held her tighter. That night, she stood before the hearth, the envelope in one hand, a match in the other. The fire had burned low, glowing with a soft orange pulse. She touched the match to the edge of the paper and watched as flames licked the corner, then curled upward, devouring lines and letters, the seal, the address, until it was all just ash falling into the coals. She did not cry. She did not second-guess. When she turned, Thomas was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, arms crossed. He had not made a sound, but he had seen. His eyes met hers. He said nothing. June walked past him, picked up a small cloth-bound book from the shelf, the one with big letters and pictures of farm animals, and set it in the center of the table. Beside it, she placed a folded piece of paper. She hesitated, then wrote a single line. "We are not done reading yet." She did not sign it. The next morning, Thomas came in from feeding the livestock and saw the book. He opened it slowly, thumbed through a few pages, then unfolded the note. He stared at it for a long time, then tucked it into the front pocket of his coat. Outside, the snow was melting faster now, and the ground, once buried and frozen, was beginning to soften. Spring crept in, slow, uncertain. The snow had receded into the gullies and shadows, and tufts of brown grass poked through the softened earth. Birds returned, their songs thin but hopeful. Clara had taken to chasing them around the yard, her laugh bouncing off the cabin walls like wind chimes in the breeze. June had begun humming again, quietly, while folding linens or stirring stew. Not songs she remembered, just notes that came from somewhere beneath the weight she had carried too long. One morning, she noticed something strange. Thomas left earlier than usual and did not come in for lunch. When she called from the porch, he did not answer. It was unlike him. Curious, she followed the narrow trail through the thinning snow toward the back shed, a leaning structure she had assumed long abandoned. The door creaked on its rusted hinges. What she saw stopped her breath. Inside, dust and cobwebs had been cleared. A wide window had been cut into the southern wall, framed in new pine, letting sunlight stream in. Thomas stood beside it, fitting a pane of glass into place, his hands steady, careful. The floor had been swept. A stack of mismatched chairs leaned against the far wall, beside a rough-hewn table that looked recently built. Books, old, some torn, others just worn, were piled in a crate near the door. He turned when he saw her. "I meant to tell you," he said. She stood frozen. "I know you used to teach. You said so, once, that you missed it." He gestured around the barn. "Figured you could use a space. Lined the walls, patched the roof. Might still leak in the back corner, but I will fix that soon." He walked over to one of the chairs, sat in it to test its strength, then stood again. "Kids out here got no school. Parents cannot read. Nobody ever built one this far from town." He picked up a small cloth from the crate, wiped dust from the seat of another chair. "Figured maybe you could start something. Doesn't have to be big, just useful." June could not speak. Thomas scratched the back of his neck, eyes flicking toward the door. "I ain't much good with words. I do not know how to say thanks for whatever this is, so I did this instead." That was when the tears came. They did not fall in great sobs. They came soft, steady, like the thawing ice along the roofline. Tears not from pain, but from recognition, from the quiet miracle of being seen. She stepped forward, ran her fingers along the smoothed edges of the new window. Light streamed in, dancing across her palm. She turned to face him. "You listened," she whispered. He nodded, once. She looked around, at the chairs, the books, the sunlit floor. "This is more than a thank you," she said. "This is a beginning." Thomas looked down at the floorboards. Clara's voice called from the porch. "Mama? Where are you?" June turned, wiped her eyes quickly, and stepped outside. "I will be right there, sweet pea." She paused at the threshold, then looked back. Thomas had gone to the opposite wall, hammering in a final nail, not asking for praise, not watching her go. Just working, quiet, steady, she smiled. The next day, she swept the barn from corner to corner. She laid out the books, lined the chairs, wrote the alphabet on a plank of pine, and hung it on the wall. And when the first child from the neighboring ranch rode in, muddy boots, freckled cheeks, clutching a stub of pencil, June was ready. It came fast, too fast for anyone to be ready. The thaw hit like a wave. Days of soft melt became a roar overnight. The mountain snow, loosened by sudden sun, bled down the hills and into the valley. Streams swelled, overran their banks, and turned to rivers. The creek near Thomas's land rose above the footbridge, then surged straight through the pasture. June woke to the sound of rushing water and wind slapping the side of the cabin. She ran to the window, heart pounding. The garden was gone. What had once been neat rows of mint and chamomile now lay buried beneath mud and broken branches. The schoolhouse, barely 2 weeks into its new life, leaned at a sick angle, one side of the roof sunken where a pine limb had struck. She burst out the door, boots sinking in soaked earth. Rain had begun to fall again, cold and hard. Clara cried from inside, frightened by the noise. June stood in the wreckage, eyes wide, breath ragged. Her hands reached into the mud, searching, hoping. She found a crushed flower stalk, limp and snapped. She knelt, holding it in her palm, tears mixing with rain. All she had planted, all she had built, it was ruined. Again. Always again. She sank to the ground, dress darkening with water and soil, gripping the broken stem like it was the last thread tying her to anything. Footsteps approached through the slush. Thomas stood beside her, soaked to the bone, mud streaking his coat. He did not speak right away. Instead, he crouched and began to sift gently through the debris. His large hands moved with an unexpected tenderness, peeling away layers of silt and straw, searching. Then he paused. From the earth he pulled a small green shoot, its roots still clinging to soil, leaves trembling but whole. Mint. He wiped it clean with his thumb, then offered it to her. "Still alive," he said. June stared at the plant in his hand. Her lips parted, but no sound came. He pressed it into her palm, closed her fingers around it. "We can plant it again," he said softly. "We can start over." She looked up at him, eyes full of rain, and something older than sorrow. "You really believe that?" she asked. He nodded. "You taught me how." She let out a breath that felt like letting go, of Missouri, of Matthew, of the weight she had carried for years without anyone ever helping her lift it. She pressed the little mint sprout to her chest. "I will plant it tomorrow," she said. He stood and reached out a hand. She took it. And as they walked back through the mud, something quiet bloomed between them, something stronger than flowers, something even floodwater could not wash away. A year passed, slow and steady like the turning of a river. Time no longer rushed June. It no longer chased her down alleyways of fear or pressed cold hands against the back of her neck. It unfolded gently now, like petals in the morning sun, familiar, unhurried, kind. Spring came early this time. The winter had not bitten so hard, and the thaw arrived not with a flood, but with a whisper. The rivers stayed within their banks. The earth opened soft and black, breathing steam into the air as if exhaling a long-held breath. It felt like the land had finally forgiven the sky. In the garden, mint sprang up first, sturdy and green, its scent sharp and alive. Then came the chamomile, with petals like lace and hearts like sunshine. And beyond the fence, in the field that once drowned beneath the runoff, golden blossoms scattered like coins tossed across the earth. Wild flowers bloomed in quiet glory, the very same seeds June had planted with little more than hope and frost-bitten fingers. The barn had changed too. What had once been a leaning shell now stood proud and square against the wind. New shingles gleamed in the Sunday. The old window, cracked in the flood, had been replaced with clear glass. Inside, laughter and footsteps filled the mornings. Barefoot children with dusty heels and open minds gathered around worn tables, tracing letters with stubby chalk and asking 100 questions. And June answered them all. She had found her rhythm, between the lessons and the laundry, the garden and the evening readings. She wore aprons more than shawls now. She smiled without hesitation. There were lines around her eyes that had not been there a year ago, but they were soft, not tired, earned, not endured. Clara sat among the older children, always the first to arrive. She watched everything, listened to every syllable like it was sacred. That morning, June crouched beside her as the sun pooled through the open barn door. She pointed to the blackboard. "Can you read that for me, Clara?" The child blinked up at the letters, lips forming carefully around each one, M-A-M-A. Wide and discolored. Then she looked up, eyes wide with wonder. "Mama!" The others clapped. Clara beamed. June felt something press hard against her ribs, a joy so big it ached. She kissed Clara's forehead, tucked a stray curl behind her ear, and stepped outside. The sun was high, the grass whispered underfoot. She stood for a moment on the porch, letting the light find her face. Across the yard, Thomas knelt by the chicken coop, sleeves rolled, shirt damp with sweat. He worked without urgency, his motions sure, content. There was no tension in his shoulders anymore. The weight he used to carry had shifted. It lived now in shared burdens, quiet glances, and unspoken understanding. June watched him for a long moment, her fingers brushing the edge of the porch railing. Then she stepped down, boots soft against the packed dirt, and crossed the space between them. "Have you ever thought of leaving this place?" she asked, voice light as wind. Thomas didn't look up right away. He adjusted the hinge one last time, ran his thumb along the wood, then straightened and wiped his hands. "There was a time," he said, "when I couldn't imagine staying." She tilted her head. "And now?" He turned to her then, really turned, his eyes tracing her face, the sunlight on her cheek, the quiet knowing in her stance. "A woman once knocked on my door," he said, "with a child in her arms and snow in her hair." His voice held no doubt, just memory and gratitude. "She brought spring with her, and I haven't wanted to leave since." June felt it in her chest, not a leap, not a flutter, but something far better, something anchored. She reached for his hand, warm and worn and familiar. He took it without question. No grand vows, no music, just two people, no longer running. And behind them, in a field once buried beneath ice and silence, the wild flowers swayed in the wind. And so, on a patch of earth once frozen and forgotten, two souls learned to grow something new, not just a garden, not just a schoolhouse, but a life, a home. Not built in haste or wrapped in vows, but in quiet glances, shared silence, and the sound of a little girl learning to say, "Mama." Because sometimes love does not arrive with a bang. Sometimes it knocks softly, holding a child in its arms, asking only for warmth, and finds a man with rough hands who simply says, "You're home." If this story stirred something in your heart, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Join us at Wild West Love Stories, where every tale is born from dust, danger, and devotion. New stories of forbidden love, healing hearts, and frontier courage every week. Turn on the bell so you never miss a single heartbeat from the Wild West, where bullets missed but hearts didn't.